Hi, I'm Doug Keck, and welcome to the Catholic Sphere. You know, each week we work to bring you an insightful discussion on what is happening in the Catholic Church from a theological perspective. Today we're discussing the new genetics, how scientific advances can be used for the good of mankind or its detriment. Joining us today, we have EWTN's TV and radio host, the ubiquitous Father Mitch Pacwa. He joins us from his Scripture and Tradition set right here in Irondale, Alabama. We also have EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, who's always with us. He is in our theology studio. And finally, my buddy, we have the founder of the Magis Center and host of Father Spitzer's Universe, Father Robert Spitzer. He joins us from his studios in Orange County, California, where he does Father Spitzer's Universe from. Great to have all of you with us on this very powerful panel, taking up a very important issue that we have to deal with. Colin, let me ask you, with the idea of genetics, and we're talking about the new genetics, what's the difference between the new genetics and the old genetics?
Well, again, I think the old genetics are what we all learned in high school about inheritance. We give credit to Father Gregor Mendel, who basically elucidated the beginning of the field of genetics and is a father of genetics in that respect. But in the 20th century, we've seen the study of biology from the point of view of just classifying organisms, describing systems, describing metabolic processes, and the kinds of things that, you know, we associated from biology class, to a much deeper probing of man that is based on the internal operation of the nucleus of the cell and the chromosomes that reside there. And that largely began with two men, one British, one American, Watson and Crick, who elucidated the structure of the DNA molecule, which makes up our chromosomes. And on the basis of that, there has been ever-growing knowledge of the nature of human inheritance at the genetic level, at the molecular level, actually, and efforts increasingly in our day to even manipulate the genes, to edit the genes, to engineer the genes. And so it's this latter kind of genetics that is not just classifying systems and types of things that happen and creatures and so on, but rather which gets into the mechanism of creatures and seeks to understand them at the molecular level and modify even that molecular level, specifically the gene code.
Right. Let me ask you, Father Mitch, why would something like this be a concern for the Catholic Church?
There's a double kind of concern. On one hand, we can be very excited about the possibility of applying this technology to curing diseases. That's a good thing. And the Church has been interested in the progress of medicine since the first universities. The University of Padua was especially concerned with medical research. We love that. And the application of this, especially among people who are needy, is very important. However, there are also other concerns. One of them would be changing people's DNA and their genetic structure for other purposes. For instance, the way somebody looks, the muscular mass, what kind of intelligence can be developed, and dealing with a variety of other aspects of the human person and the way they're shaped. Will this not only become something of a plaything for the wealthy who can afford these kind of changes in other people's DNA, in their children's DNA, or also a change that in the hands of certain government people could be used to say, these are the kinds of people we want. We want some who are not so intelligent, but are perhaps physically stronger, so they can be workers. In other words, design drones and design intellectuals, design beauty people, etc., not unlike the way Aldous Huxley had described in Brave New World, where the state determined how many and what kind of people were going to be born, not through a mother, but through this other process. And a third issue, would this also lead to the development of new humanoid species? Would there be such a manipulation of the genetics that another species of Homo, we have Homo sapiens that we are, but would this be another species?
Right.
In the hands of certain ideologues who believed in the Superman, this could be highly problematic.
Right. Well, let me ask you, Father Spitzer, in dealing with this as well, because some of it seems like a lot of these might be improvements, and you know, so we don't want the church to be Luddites on this and not accept the way things are going in the future. Does this have something to do with how we view the human embryo and its dignity?
Yes, yes, indeed it does. Obviously, just playing off of what Father Mitch just said, the first thing is, of course, when you're dealing with gene editing in the sense of trying to improve rather than rectify a defect or a genetic problem, you're trying to improve or make a super kind of human from it. You're going to get three huge problems. Number one, if you make a mistake, it automatically becomes multi-generational, and that's very, very difficult to rectify unless you can prevent, you know, progeny from the gene-edited person. But the second two problems are much more important. The first one, Father Mitch already alluded to, and that, of course, is the huge problem of creating an inferior class. So if you've got people that are literally, you know, improving the embryo, these are going to be people who can afford it. They're going to be people who can't afford gene editing, very expensive process, by the way. And if you can't afford it, then of course you are not going to have the intellectually superior, the athletically superior, the appearance superior kind of person. And you're going to create an inferior class, a class by default of serfs. Now, the problem with this, obviously, is that the superior class will have economic advantage. And even in a laissez-faire society, the inferior class will be treated as second, third-rate individuals, which is, of course, a problem in and of itself. We do not want to have an inferior class of people. But there's even a third problem that is really much more crushing. I mean, can you imagine creating a group of people? So let's suppose China wants to, you know, China's going to have a population implosion, and several other nations around the world are going to have population implosion in less than 20 years. Now, what's going to happen? They're going to have to find a solution to the problem. They're going to need people. Once you slip below the level of having 1/4 of your people trying to supply economically all the needs of 3/4 of this elderly class of people, you know, obviously you're going to go broke, and these people are never going to be able to afford it. You're going to have catastrophe not only in the economy but culturally, because you're going to have mass immigration. Now, the real problem that exists here is, you know, here's the temptation. Artificial wombs are right around the corner. Gene editing for all the superior class kinds of people is coming up, you know, lickety-split. Will people try and create a whole group of people, right, to you know, supply the population needs of this country, China or whatever, that's going through a population implosion? If they do, imagine a whole group of people who does not have the individuated empathy of a mother. They're all being raised in an artificial womb. There's no empathy in an artificial womb. There's no, you know, spiritual felt connection to a mom in an artificial womb. Just can't happen. It's a spiritual feature in my view. But the main thing, though, is you're not going to have the care of a mother. You're going to have to put, right, these people in the hands of you know, either robots or in the hands of human de facto you know, replacements, and they don't have the same love that a mother and a father have for their child. Rather, you're going to have these people who lack empathy. I don't have to tell you, if children grow up without love and empathy, That's the best way to create a sociopath ever.
Right.
Indeed, the number one reason for a sociopath is, of course, that the mother and father did not love the child. Yeah,
Right,
go ahead.
and we've seen that, haven't we, even, Father, and the panel, I'll throw it out in general, the idea of in certain situations in Eastern Europe where there were kind of large groups of babies were being taken care of by one person for extended period of time, the inability to relate and connect causes real problems with that child as it grows up, right?
Well, you even see it in our cities today in a large extent because we don't have a working families in many parts of our country, and wherever that's the case, there's usually an increase of violence, an increase of bad behavior, an increase of not going to school and getting an education to be a useful member of society. So a lot of social problems come from this lack of hereditary connection to certain individuals, and I can say, as you know, somebody who has looked into this some, that really there is a constant search. If you look at children who are orphaned and you look at children who maybe don't know who one or the other of their parents are, there is this innate desire to find out that origin, because this is something built into us. I think it's a spiritual, Father Spitzer alluded to this, the spiritual character of this. And we're called to be come back to God, who is the source of all human beings. But our intimate connection with God is through our parents. And I think from that metaphysical, really, and spiritual source, we're attracted to the need for our parents, and from that environment in which to grow derives God and the parents who mediate God's creative will to us.
Right. Father Mitch, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say that at the end of World War II, a number of war orphans were brought to Brazil to be raised. And they found that many of the infants were dying. They had all the nutrition they needed. They had sanitary care, they changed diapers, etc., and medicine. But they were still dying, and they couldn't figure out why. It was one of the nurses who realized each child needed to be held. And when they were held, they responded better and were able to just survive infancy. And so they started to bring in people. They'd bring in women who would just go around picking up the babies and holding them. And it made a complete turnaround in terms of the mortality rate. Now, if this is something that is omitted, it's not only that it can put a risk on a child's health and longevity, but again, as Father Spitzer had mentioned, the inability to have empathy with somebody else because no one had empathy for you is precisely what makes a sociopath. And you know, we see this in literature. Concerns about this show up in more serious novels like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, but also even in the Star Wars movies where they have these clones that are just made to go into battle and they're completely expendable characters. This is one of the risks of that kind of genetic engineering that we would see. And again, it makes the generation that does the genetic manipulation, that generation then gains a dictatorial power over the future of the whole human race. They make it in their own image. And oftentimes it's an image of their own needs and aspirations rather than real care for other people.
So, Father Spitzer, one of the prioritizations of the common good and justice we talk about in the churches looking at this, what about the common good? Who's determining what the common good is? Maybe these kinds of things ultimately would bring peace to the world.
And I don't think it'll bring peace to the world, and here's why. To do genetic engineering does not guarantee a good person. it can guarantee a very talented person, right? So they could be very intelligent, very athletically proficient, look at like Adonises or Venuses and so forth and so on. Alternatively, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to listen to their conscience. As Father Mitch already said, that they're going to have empathy, that they're going to have a theological sensitivity to, a moral force beyond themselves, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, all of the factors which are required for a quote unquote good person are not guaranteed and cannot be guaranteed by genetic processes and structures, right? These are not physical processes. Conscience, the numinous experience and religious sensibility, and even the sense of empathy. These are spiritual things. They're beyond physical processes and structures. So the problem then is, if you have a whole generation of people who are pretty much not devoid of empathy, but low empathy, low conscience, low religious sensibility, and they've got super high talents, you are creating, honestly, the ingredients for a very horrifying end, as you put it, Doug, to the common good. You're literally defining a hellish scenario for the human race, because now you've got a bunch of super talents who are just devoid of real conscience, empathy, and religious sensibility, all the things that allow us to be good and give us a sense of goodness to aspire to. All of that is gone, or at least at the very low end of the spectrum, and all of a sudden you've created a monster. And as Father Mitch just said, you're creating a whole group of monsters, because you start putting these things in artificial wombs, and then you start having them raised by surrogates who are holding them maybe, but not lovingly holding them. You're going to have a real problem on your hands. And the problem is, these people will be, genetically superior enough to dominate the rest of us in a most cruel and horrifying way.
I think I saw that movie. It was called The Wrath of Khan, where there was some problems. Those Trekkies out there will be following me. Let me ask you, Colin, as well, because the church has thought about these things, and there was a document that came out in 2008, Dignitatis Personae. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful document, and everybody who's interested in this subject should read it. We can think about the context that was the beginning of the stem cell revolution, people looking into how can we design stem cells, which usually in the body become certain lines of tissue in the gastrointestinal system, in the muscles, and so on. And so specifically to do therapeutic things in individuals who have problems with those organic systems. Now, the trouble was that where did they want to get them? We have an industry which is well disposed to accomplish, at least the scientific side of it, everything which has been described by Father Mitch and by Father Spitzer, and that is the in vitro fertilization industry, which takes embryos or takes human gametes, creates embryos, sorts embryos, is looking at editing embryos, will discard embryos that aren't up to snuff. In other words, in order to give birth to somebody, typically who is infertile. But the same machinery would be used for any kind of zombie scenario or whatever that you want to create fictionally.
Right.
But the trouble is that these things are good, could be used for therapeutic purposes. And I think that's important to know.
Right.
And so the church made a distinction in this period of time in Personae Humanae, made the distinction, or Personae Dignitatis, made the distinction between taking embryonic stem cells, which come from an embryo, and taking somatic cells, which come from a system, and using those to create stem cells that could be used for therapeutic purposes. So the church sees the therapeutic side of this as good. What it sees as evil is the taking of the life of an embryo to supply the needs of others, living or future or whomever, or in otherwise destroying what is innately, even biologically, a human being, an individual biological creature with a specific genome, the human genome. That's what a biological human being is, and destroying them for the good of others. And so everything else could flow from that. So people use this services thinking, well, this will solve my infertility, and you know, we rejoice when in human life when it's properly created, and even when it's improperly created. But at the same time, we have to recognize the danger of the turning of such an industry to the creation of designed children and designed human beings.
Father Mitch, out of that same document, the concern over social, moral implications of genetic technologies, also, I thought this was prescient and topical because of the AI discussion that hopefully this panel will be having in the near future, that the reaffirmation of the human being as more than genetic material, this idea that we're losing the sense of this person as being a creation of God and in God's image.
Yeah, there are so many elements of what makes a human person. You know, the psychological, the intellectual, social, just so many components, and they interplay very richly. And the richer the genetic background somebody has, and the more interesting that some of the people can be, and stronger. There's strength in improving, genetics by having people from other, ethnic and racial groups be able to have children together, because you bring not only physical elements, but also social elements. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I just wanted to toss in as a little intellectual hand grenade is that if somebody dislikes certain races, they could even use this technology to try and eliminate racial characteristics and racial groups. That would be another possibility. And the reason I mention that is we have had people in our past history who tried to eliminate other peoples, other races. This is not ancient history. This is modern history, because foolish doctrines of survival of the fittest, misapplications of Darwin, have led people to say, well, we should be the fittest, and we'll make sure you die so you are not, from these other racial groups. These are serious problems, and to eliminate those would be a huge mistake.
Right. Father Spitzer, how does human consciousness show that life is more than just DNA and chemistry? That we're not just talking about materialism here.
No, it's a really important question. There are several powers that the human being has that are completely beyond what might be called physical processes and structures. And one of those things is consciousness itself, and specifically self-consciousness. There's a real problem, and by the way, David Chalmers and other very modern people, they're not connected with a Thomistic or Augustinian viewpoint, right? They basically come from a secular point of view, call it the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem of consciousness concerns, first of all, self-consciousness or self-awareness. So we can come back upon ourselves and be aware not only of our awareness, but be aware of being aware of our awareness. So we can do a double, come back, the dog swallowing itself. So that, of course, cannot be explained by a physical process or structure, because it would mean you'd have to go at an infinite velocity to get yourself getting yourself. And that's a real problem that has not been explained. But there's even a deeper problem that Chalmers points out, namely the whole problem of interiority. Every single process and structure that we describe in the physical world of atoms, molecules, protons and electrons, quarks and quanta, every single one of those processes are externally oriented processes. They affect, as it were, the outer dimension of the proton or the electron, but there's no interiority in the proton, no interiority in the quark. That, of course, it can be self-referential. And again, the problem of interiority is, how do you get a feeling of yourself, let alone an awareness of yourself? So even the remotest consciousness is always going to have, at the very least, an inner feeling of self. And Chalmers says you just can't even have it. Even the inner feeling of a bat, as Nagel would call it, we just can't even explain it in physical processes or structures. And this problematic feature is important because that can't be imparted, right? These are the things we attribute to the soul. And a lot of transcendental philosophers do talk about a soul because the whole area of near-death experiences and terminal lucidity have really validated empirically that we do have some kind of a transcendental dimension to us that can survive bodily death. Our consciousness does survive bodily death in these studies.
Right.
And of course, even the New York Academy of Sciences attested to it. But the point I'm trying to get to, if you really do have a soul, how are you going to affect that with gene editing?
Right.
And if somehow the soul is you know, you'd say it not connecting properly or is never even appealed to, you know, within a human being, because we're so worried about the athletic or academic capability of that being, I can tell you at the end of the day, it's not going to be pretty for that person or for humanity itself. We've already implied that in the empathy problem.
Perfectly said, because we've come to the end of the program, Father Spitzer. Thank you so much for kind of wrapping things up. And I, again, would like to thank our panel. We've got, of course, Father Mitch Pacwa, and we've got Colin Donovan, and, of course, Father Spitzer joining us from his studio in California. And we would like to thank all of you for joining us. And don't forget to join us next week right here on the Catholic Sphere, where we'll bring you yet another topic dealing with theological issues in the Catholic Church. We'll see you then.